Meeting to order. Doctor, I'm going to just give it back to you and continue where you were or where you think we should be on this, and we'll go from there. To the audience, as I mentioned before the lunch break, I will be giving additional time for anyone who wishes to testify on public comment. So with that, please go ahead, Doctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll keep rolling along here, and obviously, I will follow your lead as you need me to stop or make room for someone to testify, or however you want to organize it. I think where we're going to move to next, and I suspect that this will probably bleed also into the conversation around what we learned at the professional judgment panel meetings, is the Wyoming specific factors. And there's, as you can see, 6 of them there. I'll just walk through them. The first one was salary levels. And there was a consistent concern that the model salaries are too low pretty much across the board. That was the general view of the PJ panel. So we'll talk more about that when the time comes. But a huge part of the evidence-based model is to determine what the appropriate or the best salary levels are in the state in which we're working, because as we've discussed earlier, salaries or personnel costs, so it's not just salaries, but personnel costs represent something on the order of 80% of school district budgets. So what the levels are and how they work are important. I think that the big issue in Wyoming is that school districts are generally paying higher salaries than the model funds, and they have somewhat larger classes than the model funds as a result, or yeah, the model fund. So there are fewer, particularly teachers. I think the number of superintendents is pretty consistent because there's one in each district, and the staffing varies in other positions. But salary levels is an important concern. One of the big cost items in all organizations, whether they're public agencies, public governments, or private firms, is the cost of health insurance. Anybody who owns their own company or works that just knows that health insurance costs have generally increased. One of the challenges in a model that's supposed to provide adequate funding is, again, to figure out how do you estimate a reasonable number for what those costs should be. And what we have done is used the state's health insurance policies as the way to estimate the costs for employees. And we do that because theoretically the state could allow school district employees to join the state plans, and my understanding is at least one school district in Wyoming, Natrona County, does. Other districts have those resources and can make their own choices, but it does create, in some ways, incentives to find programs that meet individual employees' needs and with some luck are cost effective. And the state program. Now, we did hear some concerns about that as well at the PJ panel, so I'll talk about more. I want to back up to salary levels just a little bit. The model it starts generally with, we work with Professor Stoddard, and we estimate the appropriate salary levels for various positions, including generally average salary for teachers. In Wyoming, it started with MAP and has continued as we've gone forward. There's a process. A school district over in the short term has relatively little control over the demographic characteristics and educational attainment of their teachers. And salary schedules for teachers, if you're familiar, are a matrix. And if you were to start in the upper left-hand corner, it's usually a base salary for a teacher with no experience and a bachelor's degree, or a teacher credential, whatever it works out, and each district has their own salary schedule. And then typically as you move across the columns, as you gain more education, additional units of study or master's degree or even a doctorate, you earn a higher salary, and for each year of experience, you get additional pay. So the matrix increases salaries as teachers do more professional development and as they teach longer in their school districts. So in Wyoming, every year, I think, Matt, are you the one who does it, or is it someone at WDE? They actually do a computation based on some work that was done MAP hired an economist, we rehired him in our first recalibration, and instead of since to sort of adjust each district's total salary pool for teachers and for administrators, because the court ruled that they had to do it for administrators as well, and I want to say Campbell too. They look at that and make that adjustment. So a district that has younger, less experienced teachers who've had fewer units of education would see their salary, if you will, decreased a little if their salary below the average, if they're below the average in the state. And a district with more senior teachers with higher degree attainment would see an increase above. Now, we've not done that in other states. We've really just used the state's average salary, but that continues to be done in Wyoming. And I'm not enough of a lawyer to know what would happen if that were changed, because I know that in Campbell too, the court said there was a good thing to do for teachers and needed to be done for administrators. So I don't know, and I'm not, my reading of the WA ruling seems that it doesn't speak to that specific issue, to my knowledge. So that's how salaries are calculated. Health insurance is calculated, as I said, based on, now the one big difference is, I believe the state model, as it's funded, only provides the amount of money for employees who actually use the insurance. And there's two categories of employees who might not use insurance. One are employees who have health benefits or health insurance through a spouse or partner's employment that they deem to be better for them, and so they don't use the benefits. Or two employees who are below some threshold, it's usually about 50%, who aren't eligible for benefits. Now, our view in the model is that both of those categories should still be eligible to receive, and our evidence-based model would provide funding for both of those. The state has chosen to do it differently. My sense is the more important of those two obviously would be those who aren't eligible because they're only working part-time compared to those who have benefits that they've deemed better elsewhere. But we think it's important that every employee have access to health benefits. So our model looks a little different than what the current state-funded model is. Two big issues that have been talked about a great deal.
Doctor, just a minute. President Whiteman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Pike, is there a way we can see the model for teacher salaries and the chart you're talking, the matrix? Do you have that? Is that available on the website, Matt? Is that public information?
Mr. Chairman and Senator Beitman, it changes annually. And each district kind of has their own amount within the block grant, and it necessarily doesn't align with a teacher's salary schedule. The model provides for kind of a base salary, and it adjusts for years of experience on average of the district, of each district. And then it also adjusts for the educational attainment up to a master's degree, and then also for those that hold PhDs. And it does that for each salary category. Teacher salary schedules generally give adjustments for a bachelor's plus credits, up to then a master's degree plus credits. And that's not how our model operates. But we can certainly provide the amounts for each school district and then show what the impact of the regional cost adjustment as well. Dr. Pike hasn't touched on that quite yet, but after the adjustments for experience and education are made, then we make a final adjustment for the regional cost adjustment as well. So we can put together some information for the committee. It is public. The Department of Education reruns those annually, and those are the amounts that are included in the funding model that they administer, and school districts fill out for their school finance information to determine their funding. So happy to put that together for the committee.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, I just think it'd be helpful for the public and even the employees themselves to see what the model says based on their level of attainment, what the matrix says versus what the district is paying them. Because a lot of times we get blamed for that and we don't set teacher salaries. The districts do. So I think it'd be helpful to have that information publicly available. Thank you, Mr.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, real quick, sorry to delay a little bit, but we've also requested a special collection. The Department of Education does annually collect salary schedules from school districts. However, that's not done until the fall of each school year. But we've requested the Department of Education to submit or have school districts submit those school year 2025-26 salary schedules. And I believe those are, that data window is open, and I think the end of June is the kind of the timeline for that to be collected. It'll have to be cleaned a little bit, but we should have some information on the most recent school year salary schedules for teachers here shortly.
Other questions? Yes, Senator Schuler.
Mr. Chairman, just to tag in, or tie in, I guess, with Senator Beitman, is there any way to get the data that shows what the percentage of benefits that each school district is providing versus salary?
Mr. Chairman and Senator Schuler, we have not contemplated that. I presume you're looking at health benefits. We can certainly request the Department of Education to do another special collection on health benefits. I will say the Wyoming Education Association in the past has collected a robust set of information on benefits. It's my understanding some school districts have discontinued their involvement in that data collection. And so in years past, it's been collected for most school districts. In the most recent couple of years, the participation in that data has not been robust by school districts. So we have some information that the Wyoming Education Association has shared with us. We can certainly put that together. One other piece we are collecting is on the retirement side. As you recall, in the K-12 funding model, we allocate an amount similar to state employees, just similar to health insurance. The employee and the employer share is 12.69%. There's an additional employer share reimbursed outside of the funding model up to I think it's 2.25%. And then there's an employee share that state of Wyoming employees are responsible for. I think it's a little over 3%. And what this special data collection is trying to identify is how much of that employee share that state of Wyoming employees are responsible to pay, how many school districts are picking up that amount, a partial amount or all of it. We just don't know that. So we are going to collect that piece of information and bring that back to the committee in September, hopefully. But we can certainly extend that data collection to health benefits. And we do know how many employees are participating in health insurance in the district plans in a similar type of plan to the state of Wyoming. We just don't know what those premium amounts are and whether or not the districts are paying 100% of that premium amount or 85%, 82%, 90%. So we'll extend that and collect that information.
Co-Chairman Heiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Pikus, you mentioned about salaries for teachers. We may not be funding salaries adequately for teachers, but I haven't heard much about other positions like custodians, food service workers, central office. Do we have the same problem there, or to a lesser degree or more? Hopefully we will see the data when this is all put together in a package. We can look at other positions as in addition to teachers. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Co-Chair, that is correct. I think one of the main differences is that teachers are a unique labor market that is the only organizations, for the most part, with very few exceptions, who employ teachers are school districts. And so estimating teacher salaries is somewhat challenging. Estimating a market for custodians, maintenance workers, others who work in school districts, clerical workers, you can estimate those through the labor markets and what employers elsewhere in the state are also paying. And so those are estimated in a more straightforward manner, because there's not too, there's I don't know if you'd call teachers a monopolist or not, because the WA doesn't necessarily represent every district in exactly the same way, but has district representatives. And you have 48 districts who are the buyers. So you have, in both directions, you have a limited market. So it's much harder to estimate. For many of the other positions, you can use what's going on in the labor market to estimate those. So that's how we get to those. And then, and the other benefits that get added in is to the extent that districts participate in Social Security, worker comp, all those other things are also included in the model to ensure that we're covered the total cost of employee compensation.
Okay, Dr. Pikus, go ahead.
Okay, so I was going to move to the regional cost adjustment, the RCA. The logic behind the RCA is that across any state, but particularly a very large state, there are regional differences in the costs that employers or school districts or employees experience. The easiest example in Wyoming is the much higher cost of living in Teton County. 20 years ago, that was the example, as I understand it, as I've looked at the data. Excuse me again, there are some counties that are catching up in other parts of the state. They haven't reach the same levels. And so from an economic standpoint, it makes sense to adjust the amount of money that a school district receives based on those differences in the cost of living so that you can recruit. The theory is you need more money in Teton than you do, let's just use Casper because it's relatively close to the average, than you do in Casper to recruit a teacher of the same quality and the same level of experience. That's how the economic theory goes. The typical way most states have done it in recent years is through what's called a comparable wage index. And what you do is you take estimates or analyses of wages in other sectors of the economy, either all wages or more usually positions that have similar educational and training expectations as teachers, and you compare how those salaries vary across the state. And then you use that to create an index around the state average that adjusts each district's amount of money, at least for teacher and other certified compensation. In 2005, the MAP had recommended using the Wyoming Cost of Living Index as the way to make that adjustment. MAP was concerned that the component, and the Wyoming Cost of Living Index is computed by, it's the employment office, there's a bureau here at the state that calculates the index, and it's calculated every 6 months, and there's a formula for how it's woven into the model as we talk about it in a minute. They only used half of the housing component of that index, and in Campbell 2, the court said it had to all be used, so that's been used so far. We recommended in 2005 that the state use what's called a hedonic index, and the idea behind a hedonic index is to look at the positives and negatives of any particular location and try to compare those through a variety of different measures, and then build an index that compares different regions of the state using a hedonic index. At the time, Professor Bruce Baker prepared that hedonic index for us. And again, both of these indexes would have an average across the state of 100 or 1.0, which means that some districts get an index that's below 1 or below 100, and some above 1 or above 100. The different districts benefit differently from the hedonic than from the WCLI. And we argued at the time that the hedonic, or we were going to argue that the hedonic was the better way to go. We were prepared to present that after I'm pretty sure it was a representative from Teton County presented an alternative. And then after a break for lunch, the legislature or the committee members had reached a compromise, which is the way legislation works. And the compromise was that each district's regional cost adjustment would be the greater of the WCLI, the hedonic index, or a value of 100. So in other words, no one would get less than the state average. And that has stayed in place for 20 years. The hedonic index is, although Lori Taylor estimated a new hedonic index once or twice, it's not been woven into the model, so the hedonic index we estimated in 2005 is still there. The WCLI changes annually as it's adjusted, and then obviously there's a value of 1. In the data that Matt's presented to you in the past, he's shown each district and which of the two indices or the value of 100 that each one is used in the model. In 2024, the legislature passed legislation requiring collection of some new data elements at the request of Lori Taylor, who has done the work to estimate, who did the previous work to estimate the more recent hedonic indexes. And those data, as I understand it from my last conversation with Lori, have been collected, and she's working on building that index. Her intent is to actually build a composite index. That's what her recommendation will be. That would be a combination of the new hedonic index she calculates based on the new data she has and a comparative wage index. And she'll prepare us a report, and we'll look at all of those, and obviously it becomes a legislative decision as to how that process works, and whether or not you continue to include the WCLI, and whether or not you continue to include the base of 100. So that's what we'll have. That's what will make sense. That will work, and it's been a straightforward process. I think every year it's calculated, it's applied, and it's been less controversial, I think, than the economic cost index or the inflation adjustment. We're going to recalibrate the system. We're going to give you our best estimate of what the cost of an adequate education to meet the requirements of the Campbell decisions and the WAV Wyoming decision are, what those costs are. And we'll have a number that you'll have to work with for the moment, because I like to think sometimes like an economist. In the world of economists, I'm a school finance guy. In the world of most people, I can get away with being an economist. But an economist would tell you that the model is adequate when it was estimated, but a year forward, it's no longer adequate because changes in costs mean that you need to make those adjustments, if you will, adjusting for inflation. And so each year, again, it's Lori Taylor who did this work and does this work every year. She estimates a 4-part composite economic cost index. And that includes compensation for professional staff, compensation for non-professional staff, utilities index, and a materials and supplies index, which should cover most of the expenditures, if not all the expenditures of school districts. She builds a composite and provides a number. Now, it's up to the legislature to determine what ECA to actually put into the model each year. And as you know, last year you had a ECA of 8.5%, which will apply to the model for 25, 26 expenditures or revenues for districts. They'll expend money as they make choices with the revenues they receive. Over the years, the amount appropriated by the legislature has not always been the same as Dr. Taylor's estimates, and in some years there hasn't been an ECA. In other years there's been one, but it has sunset. And so today the cumulative ECA is less than the cumulative ECA would be if the estimates that Lori Taylor provided had been used each year. So that's suggests that the model may be somewhat underfunding schools because of that difference. So that's, I don't think we're going to recommend changing the ECA, at least our in the desk audit, when Dr. Taylor gave her opined on it, she seemed to feel that the current model worked well and met the needs of the state of Wyoming. So that's where that stands at this point in time. And again, we will provide that and the model that Matt has, the model that the department has, the model that we're going to build parallel to those two will all enable that to be a variable in the model so that we can use the ECA she estimates, any ECA that the legislature would prefer to look at and see how it affects costs. It would be easy to just change that number and re-estimate the total. So that's it's no harder or easier to estimate than an RCA. It's just operated differently over the last 20 years or so.
Any questions from the committee? Okay, Doctor.
Okay, thank you. And then the final one, of course, the state does do audits of the financial position of school districts. And that obviously becomes important in making sure the money is expended as reported and what's supposed to happen with it. I guess one other, we'll deal with it when we get to, I was thinking something else, but I think I'll worry about that when it's in the conversation about what we learned in the professional judgment panels. So that's how the evidence-based model works. I'm next going to shift to the 6 components that the judge ruled on in WAV Wyoming. So again, I'll make sure there are no questions, if that's okay.
Senator Office.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, one thing that I think stood out and reflecting on public testimony as well, there was discussion, and in the legislature is often discussion about our basket of goods as defined by the court. And we have those in statute. What we contemplate our common core of knowledge and common core of skills are in 21-9-101. But when we look at the components of the evidence-based model, they seem relatively independent from what we contemplate as our basket of goods, where that's, reading, language, arts, social studies, mathematics, science, and other than the fact that we have special language and special calculations surrounding career and technical education, it seems like the model costs are relatively independent from the content, because you're building around what is effectively a standard school day, and you need this many hours of time, and how much does it cost to teach almost regardless of content in that time. Is that accurate, that this, it doesn't matter quite as much the details of what's being taught during the day to develop the funding model, as much as you are teaching school every day for this many hours and you need the common support regardless of what's being taught? Or how much did you look at what we're teaching specifically? Where did our specific basket of goods come into play when developing this model?
Mr. Chair, Senator Rothfuss, that's a really important and great question, so thank you. The dichotomy, if you will, between the basket of goods and the way the model's built is a function of the basket of goods speaks to a series of skills that students should get. It would be, to my mind, particularly at the elementary level, it's possibly easier at a high school level and somewhat mixed in a middle school level to actually ascertain exactly what it would cost to provide the reading requirement or meet the math requirement or other requirements, other pieces of that basket. Or, for example, computing skills, which are, of course, would flow through any course where students use computers, notwithstanding the discussion we had earlier about computers, on the process. So the model is designed so that you have classrooms that can teach what's required, whatever that is. And most states' equivalent of the basket of goods don't look that different at the legislative level. Things may parse out differently when individual school districts or individual states look to the relative priorities or the relative needs. But the idea behind the evidence-based model is we think you can meet your basket of goods, and Vermont can meet its basket of goods, as can Michigan or Colorado or any other state, with the resources that the evidence-based model estimates. And the idea is to put in best educational practices, follow research to get there. So that's why it doesn't specifically say each of those elements is costed out.
So then it seems reasonable to conclude that within reason, unless something were extreme in change to our basket of goods and you really stepped outside of what a normal traditional education was, the contents of a reasonable looking basket of goods doesn't strongly determine the cost of the model, because you're providing a high quality education, and then the assumption is that this is the content that will be taught through that high quality education. So I think this is important because we've had the conversation over the years, do we need to address the basket of goods as determining what the funding model should be? And I just want to make sure that I understand clearly that unless we did something incredibly extreme in changing the basket of goods, tweaking what's being taught at the school is not going to fundamentally change the cost of delivering that education. Is that a fair assessment?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, it's exactly a perfectly fair assessment. And the challenge, I think, would be what would you take out of the basket of goods? I mean, the basket of goods is a nice, straightforward, concise. I don't want to say simple. That's not the right word. Teaching reading is not simple. All of those things are not simple. But it gives you a list of what we prioritize and what to do. The how do you do it is, of course, the issue. We're confident, based on our understanding of the research, that there are, in the evidence-based model, adequate resources to provide the basket of goods to every child in the state. Now, does that mean every child's going to succeed wildly and achieve above level? There's proficient, there's advanced, the levels of the system. That's more complicated. There are 7,600 teachers. There's 85,000 students. Each are going to interact differently. So there's no way that the allocation of resources can guarantee, but we think that with some confidence, it gives every child that opportunity, and generally speaking, enough resources to hope that they all do well.
President Biden.
Mr. Chairman, just before we leave this subject, so taking it a step further, are you confident, Dr. Pikus, that the funding model adequately spits out the number we need for CTE based on Senator Rothfuss's question regarding the basket of goods? Because it seems like we're hearing from out there that there's lack of space, whether it wasn't thought through when we were building the schools, or there seems to be not enough money for an adequate CTE education. Your thoughts?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Beitman, I'm less confident of that. The school funding model provides more resources than the evidence-based model does at the moment. It's that weight of 0.29 that's not in our model. I heard the message loud and clear that it's not enough, but that's also coming from people in the schools. I've also been speaking with a number of people who are more expert in CTE issues than I am. And CTE is viewed very differently today than it was 20 years ago when we first did this. So while I don't want to walk out on a limb and get cut off behind me when I say this, but I would anticipate that we will find that the resources needed for CTE may be higher than what they currently are. Based on your own experiences and what we're learning about the needs for CTE. And I think there were some people who testified earlier very eloquently about the needs for people who don't need a four-year college education but need more CTE expertise. And then I think one of the things that you might want to also consider is the coordination and the role of community colleges in providing these skills, as well as partnerships with private industry. I don't remember, one of you asked about the partnerships as well, all of which, revolve around helping provide a qualified workforce. And I think one of the challenges in CTE, and it's a bigger challenge when we've talked with people before about estimating adequacy in community colleges. It's much harder because there's many different goals in a community college. But it's harder to estimate these things in where the economy is constantly changing, and the need for, I think he may have left, but the need for so many electricians and so many welders and all those things. That's probably different than it was 20 years ago. It may be different again in 5 years and 10 years, you don't know. So the system may need to adapt. And the trick is in the 5-year recalibrations, how one thinks about that. It looks to me like Mike is going to add some wisdom to that. So I'm going to trust him to do so.
Mr. Chair, Senator, what we've seen nationally is kind of 20 years ago, you would have seen a single weight for CTE or a single dollar amount per kid. People have realized it's kind of all over the map, right? And there are programs that don't cost that much more than general ed programs, but there are some that cost way more. And so states have started to create tiers of funding based on what kind of CTE program you are in. And some have even gone as far, and I believe Tennessee was the first one who did this, creating tiers based on what you need in your state. So they had a higher priority for people in medical care, and so they gave a higher weight for those to hope to encourage schools to take those and to encourage students to enter those programs. So it really has changed a lot. And so there's more and more research that shows, especially something like welding, that's a very costly program, but it's highly needed. So that's a very different program than, say, training someone for a job in tourism, even though there's cost there too. But so, yeah, that's what may happen with the recommendations, is it could be a tiered system based on the cost of providing each one of these.
Yes, please.
So a follow-up to that would be, are there equitability concerns with a tiered system? Because if you're favoring plumbers or welders at the expense of nurses or CNAs, you could have an equitable argument there, I would think. Am I wrong?
You're right. It's also one of the difficulties with CTE because it is taught very differently when you kind of move from the east to the west. In eastern states and in Midwestern states, they tend to have standalone CTE schools that are funded differently than other schools. And they have the space and the people for all of these programs. As you move further west, the schools are too spread out, so you can't have a kind of core number of kids for your CTE programs. So it becomes a little harder for individual schools, especially we were talking a little earlier today about a 90-student school district. It's very difficult for you to provide those kind of CTE programs. Some of it is too for an equity issue. Even if you provided additional funding for, say, auto repair, the places might not have the space for it, or they might not have someone in their community who can even teach that necessarily. So that can be an equity issue too, and that's where Dr. Pike is talking about community colleges. Could be a solution for that, but again, not every one of your districts is going to be conveniently located by community college. So it becomes a little tough, because especially with CTE, a lot of these can be hands-on, and you can't do it necessarily online. I don't know how you do auto repair online.
Good stuff, thanks.
Other questions? Yes, Senator McEwen.
Just curious, we heard the shortages for CTE jobs, welding, construction. Well, what do we estimate the shortages of the tourism industry and those jobs?
I have his name on his card. Connect with him. It was probably Dr. Hill, Rob Hill. Yeah. He's still back there. Okay. Maybe you want to answer that question better than I can. I thought I heard 3,000 or 4,000, but I'm not sure. Is that okay, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, please
Okay,
do.
thank you.
Please do.
I didn't realize I was taking your role there. I didn't intend to do that.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the question. And actually, I was on the phone with them earlier this morning. They have about 34,000 workers in the state, but they have significant workforce needs as well. So hiring is a priority for them as well.
Follow up? Anything else?
Do we have an idea if the numbers are comparable? Is the tourism industry that short compared to the numbers you gave us on welders and construction workers?
Mr. Chairman and Senator McEwen, I'm not sure on that. I think the technical one is very pronounced and very serious. I think that they're both struggling, but probably a little more on the technical end than on the hospitality and tourism end, but still a need.
Okay, great, thanks. Any other questions? Okay, Dr. Pikus, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for allowing Dr. Hill to fill in there. He just clearly had better data than I did to answer that specific question. I appreciate it. I'm going to move on to the WA v. Wyoming lawsuit then, assuming I can get my, there we go, get my computer to change. The court ruling was, I believe, 186 pages long.
Yes, Senator.
I just have one quick follow-up. Do we think the shortage in hospitality and tourism is due to education or just the workforce doesn't support it? Thank you.
And who's that directed to?
Anyone who can answer it?
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, may I offer, we'll work with the Department of Workforce Services and see if they have any data on some of these workforce areas in addition to hospitality and tourism, whether it's electrical, plumbing. They might be able to be the agency who can answer that best.
Great, thank you. Okay, let's continue.
Okay, thank you. And Matt, thank you. The court ruling was 186 pages long. My understanding is it has been appealed, and it dealt with a number of issues. The judge walks through the testimony he heard and reaches the conclusion that there are 6 elements in the current funding model that don't meet constitutional standards and need to be considered as part of the recalibration. And those 6 items, and we made sure during our PJ panels that we spent at least an hour talking about each of them after we'd gone through things where often it had come up before. One of them is adjusting for the effects of inflation consistently, and we talked about that with the ECA, and my translation of that is that it needs to be what the estimate of the ECA is, or something approaching that, so that the ECA is consistently applied. Salaries for school districts to recruit and retain personnel. His ruling, I don't know how whether he can tell you how much to pay teachers or not, but his concern was that the currently salaries are not high enough to recruit and retain teachers. As we'll talk about again in a little while, 20 years ago when we completed our work on the evidence-based model, Wyoming's teacher salaries were higher than all 9 surrounding states. Professor Stoddard has shown in the report she did as part of the desk audit that you're ahead of some states but not others, and the growth in salaries has been slower than most states. The judge also felt it was important to have more mental health counselors in elementary schools. In the evidence-based model, roughly the concept of the prototypical schools, an elementary school generates a counselor for a prototypical school, or one for about every 450 students. It depends on how it works out. At the middle and high school levels, that estimate is one for roughly every 250 students. Whether he was simply saying it should be one for 250 for everybody or not, I don't believe the court ruling is that specific. We, as I've indicated earlier, we've pretty consistently heard everywhere we go the need for additional mental health counselors. So we're looking at that and trying to understand what that need might be, or how we would estimate what that is. The fourth one is school resource officers. School resource officers don't appear in the evidence-based model. The reason is that our logic, which we laid out in the 2020 recalibration, is that a police department estimates the officers that are needed, usually using some ratio of number of officers per so many population at given times of the day. During school hours, 1/3 of the population in many communities are in school. So the police need to be not in the school, but very close to be able to respond. That had been our logic and issue, because at the time, most of the conversation around SROs had to do with responding to the risk of and the existence of shooting incidents in schools. Again, I'll bring this up more. We'll have more opportunity to talk about this down the road, but in talking with the PJP panels, they felt that, well, okay, that's part of it, but a single SRO is not necessarily going to be able to respond by themselves to a shooter situation, and in fact, other police will need to respond anyway. But they also wanted somebody in the school to create a presence, which would hopefully reduce the probability of such an event happening to begin with. And despite that we see them a lot, they're still relatively rare events. in terms of the number of schools we have, but also to just work with students, give them a greater appreciation of law enforcement, what law enforcement can do, just make schools overall generally safer. So there is, I don't think that I have a model of what school resource officers should look like. It's a complicated thing, and it's not just like hiring a teacher, because if you particularly need an armed sworn law enforcement officer, you probably want to contract with an agency that already provides those rather than try to find out how to do it yourself as a school district. And the school districts seem to recognize that as well. So my assumption is that our next evidence-based model will include school resource officers. Certainly that's the judge's mandate, so we certainly need to provide you with an estimate of what those would cost as part of the modeling and part of what we do. We'll do so. We talked briefly earlier about school food services, which I said was not in the model because it should be self-supporting. The evidence, the general feeling in Wyoming is that perhaps may not be the case, so we're working on that one more time and see where we get to. And then I believe the judge said there should be computers for every student and needed the support for instructional technology. So those 6 items, and I'll be sure and bring those forward in the conversation on the professional judgment panels as well. They're there. I think that it's our responsibility as part of the evidence-based model to bring you good, strong estimates of what that would cost within the context of a school that's funded and designed using our evidence-based model. I don't know where the Wyoming Supreme Court will go, what will happen down the road, or how this will change, or what the interaction of the courts with the legislature will be moving forward. That's, I mean, we're happy to support you in any way we can as the process goes forward. But we want to, at least initially, in between now and when the report's finalized, be able to provide you evidence-based, logical rationales of what the cost of these might be in Wyoming.
Any questions? No questions? Okay, Dr. Pikus.
Oh, my mouse has moved again. I apologize. Okay, so I'm ready to begin talking about the preliminary professional judgment panels. Would you like me to continue with that? Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm glad to do that. We, as part of this study, did something we've not done before, which had, for lack of a better term, preliminary professional judgment panels. Our approach has always been to go in after we build the model, after people have a chance to review the model, and then see what they think of it. The truth is in Wyoming, everybody knows the model. The people who've worked in schools for any length of time behind me, they're familiar with the model. They know the model. Many years ago, when my son was looking at high schools, there was in the middle of a meeting, there was a fire drill. We went outside and we met a newly hired science teacher who had just come from Wyoming, which is unfortunate for Wyoming because you need more science teachers here. But when I mentioned that I'd worked in Wyoming and done some work there, all of a sudden this light went on and she said, is that like the PICUS, is the PICUS-Odden finance model? I said, yes, it is. And she'd been a student of Professor Burby's back when he was alive and participated in a conference call I once did. So we had this great kind of thing. My son, meanwhile, was trying to dig a foxhole behind me and hide from this whole situation. But, you know, so we've talked about these for a long time. So we really wanted, since everybody knows the model, to find out before we started, what do you think of the model? And we really had a very open and flowing conversation rather than try to drive it like many focus groups do down to a specific sort of set of things. And each session was 4 hours long. And we asked simple questions. What works well? What does not work? What needs to be improved? And what cost-effective strategies do you recommend? And the conversation flowed. I would try to change the slide to the particular questions we went along as there was conversation, but it organically just followed through and emerged, and we heard a lot of things. So it was very interesting. It was very helpful. As I mentioned, we did 8, 4 online, 4 in person. And I want to thank all of the educators who attended all of those meetings and gave us their candid views. Some of it was very easy to hear, some of it was less so, but all of it delivered in a friendly, positive way that I think together we find ways to continue to improve the model for students in Wyoming. So it's been kind of a long month of doing these sessions and following up and reading about it, but it's been, for me, a very informative and very helpful month, and I've enjoyed it very much, and I got to see a lot of your state, so that was all a good thing, too. Those are the 4 sessions. I think I've talked about those before. I am meeting with school finance officers on Thursday, the day after this session ends, to get further input from them and talk about some data issues and a variety of things, and see if there's some additional insights. And Richard Parker in Park 1, Park 6, I get confused which it is. No, he's in Bighorn, has organized that for us. So I appreciate that. So what works well? I always like to start with the positives. It's a shorter list, too. That's just the way things work. And again, anything in blue is stuff that has come in since I sent you the first round of PowerPoints. We had 3 sessions after I prepared those PowerPoints, and I had only quickly reviewed from a 4th session. So overall, the respondents feel that the model works well. They particularly like the block grant. Remember, we come up with a dollar amount, but then districts are able to spend those resources as they see fit, as they think works best for their individual situation. They feel that it gives school leaders the flexibility to meet local student needs. They feel that the flexibility gives them flexibility to direct spending towards local priorities and needs. The assumption being what works in Rock Springs may not be the same as what works in Gillette. So there may be needs for different sorts of challenges, issues. It allows them to adapt as the nature of their student body and the demographics of the students change as well. They generally and fairly vehemently oppose the use of categorical grants to fund any portions of this. They feel that they would rather be trusted to make those decisions, those judgments within the context of a block grant and have more flexibility than less, which categorical grants provide. So that they also felt that the model and the formula is formula-based and it's predictable. That is, they kind of know from year to year roughly what they're going to receive. They can say, okay, we got this year. Our student enrollments are going to change a little bit here or there, up or down, and they can come fairly close to having a general way to know what will happen, and they can enact long-term strategic plans to ensure that the schools are operating efficiently, providing resources for children as they think is the best way. So those are the parts that work well. Now we have a few more. They would like to maintain the current core class ratios in the model, 16-1. Is it K5 for 6 or is it K4? I think it's K4. I apologize for that error. And 21-1 in grades, I'm sorry? That's right, okay. And then 21-1 in grades above that. There is some concern that if those ratios were to change, classrooms that have been built with the approval of the school construction committee in recent years would not be large enough to handle larger classes. I guess that, I don't know quite how to respond to that, since they also told me that their classes often were larger than the model put together because they were paying higher salaries and had larger classes. So I'm not sure how to evaluate that without going and looking at that, but both issues arise. There was no discussion of ratios for specialist or elective teachers. So we assume the EB model ratios work well. We asked it, it didn't really, there wasn't a large conversation around those. And as is, indicated, in the middle school, our evidence-based model most places is 20% specialists, and in Wyoming, it's 33%. They like the reimbursement models for special education and transportation because there are just substantial differences in the location of children who need special education services and could have very differential impacts on school districts. They like that they get reimbursed. They like the same issue with transportation. Transportation for students varies greatly depending on the density, sparsity of the student population and the overall size of the school district and the location of the schools. So they felt that this was an important part of keeping things that makes sense in order to recognize those differences and trying to build a formula. I know that Several organizations in the past have tried to formalize special ed finance and have really not had much luck in coming up with something that seemed to work in Wyoming. As I understand it, I think Mike told me this yesterday, Wyoming is the only state with 100% reimbursement for special ed. And there was the Association for Education Finance and Policy, which is a professional organization that I attend every year. Someone presented a paper where he seemed startled that a state did that, and thought it was a really powerful way to think about doing things for special ed, given how things change over time and children move from districts to district. He was like surprised, like, wow, somebody thought of that. Y'all have been doing it for many years. So at least one junior academic thought it was a good idea. That's kind of worth what you paid for that piece, but it was there in the session. I think it makes sense in Wyoming as well. I think that there are possibly ways to look at finding strategies for cost reduction. And in the one of the concerns around cost reduction is maintenance of effort levels in terms of spending that the federal government requires. Nate Levinson wrote there's several pages, a special section perhaps in the appendix to our last report that District Management Group did that talked about how that's less of a problem than it often feels like it is, and how you can change spending levels and be within compliance with maintenance of effort. The one thing that did come up is a concern about it, the possibility of same-year reimbursements rather than reimbursement for the previous year. And the examples were when costs made a dramatic change for some reason, like in a school district with a $500,000 special ed budget, and a child shows up who requires a $150,000 service in the current year, they don't have those resources. And it would be helpful to do that, to provide that resource in advance. There are other ways to do that, including a special fund, loans. I don't know, in some states, banks often provide tax revenue anticipation notes or something similar, where they lend money over the short term at very, very low interest rates. So there are other ways to approach that, but it's a concern in districts. And I know that one of the issues also is around reserves, and that reserves have been 15% of the budget. And when you moved the transportation and special ed out of the funding model to stand on their own, reserves were increased to manage that. And then there's apparently a point in time where that changes back to 15% instead of the current 30%. There's pretty much a feeling of they'd like to keep it at 30%. So that'll probably come up again on a slide here, but it's important in the context of those particular things as well. I'm going to move to what does not work unless there are questions about what works well. I'm always happy to talk about what works well.
Any questions?
Not yet.
Okay, Doctor, go ahead.
Is that a promise, Representative Kelly? It's all good. Okay, let's talk about what does not work. And I've broken this into 4 categories that, as I've gone over my notes as I was coming out here yesterday and looking at it, they're going to bleed across. They're not as simple as 1, 2, 3, 4, but they're generally in this thing. We'll talk about personnel issues, talk about financial issues, the model components that the participants felt need to be recalibrated, and then other issues that came up. And these were, needless to say, a much longer part of all of our conversations, and that this would also include concerns around, and we should include in this conversation, the 6 components that came out of the ruling in WAV Wyoming. So personnel issues I already hinted at when I said what works well is they like the 16 and 21, and they know that the evidence-based model is 15 and 25. So the message I heard was don't change. We don't want to see those ratios changed. I don't know that there's a simpler way to say that or to go forward with that. The second issue is they're concerned about teacher shortages. There's 2 components to teacher shortages, I think. I think there's one, there's just concern that salaries haven't kept up with surrounding states. Particularly, we went to the 4 corners of the state. And in southwestern Wyoming, particularly in Evanston, but even as far further east as Rock Springs, we had concerns that Utah's made immense progress in recent years at raising teacher salaries, and they feel that they're losing teachers to Utah. We heard that message in Cheyenne as well, with losing teachers to Colorado. We heard much less of it in Cody and Gillette. I think that's because Montana and the Dakotas don't compete as well salary-wise as Colorado and Utah do today. So that's the concern, and that's the feeling about that. They're also concerned that University of Wyoming is not producing an adequate number of new teachers. I've asked, as part of the recalibration, many of you probably know Neil Theobald, who was the president of the University of Wyoming, and then he did some work at the College of Education for several years. I asked him to help write a paper on teacher supply and demand in Wyoming, which he's currently working on. Neil and I started as brand new professors in 1988 at the same time. He at the University of Washington and me at USC. I stayed at USC. He's moved around a little more and held 2 presidencies. But he's a good friend and is eager to continue to help in this regard. So we'll, combined with the work that Chris Stoddard does on salary levels and supply and demand for teachers, as well as the work that Dr. Zamora, University of Arkansas does, who's working with Chris Stoddard on this, we'll have more sense of some data on the existence of shortages. One of the problems is you're a very large, very diverse state. In the literature, the general view of teacher supply and demand is almost all teachers do their whole teaching career within a 50-mile radius of where they did their teacher training. Wyoming would not be a state where that happens. The distances are greater and there are fewer schools, and many, went to the school in South Dakota, or have now more and more started taking online programs. And there are concerns about the quality of those programs. Some concerns about University of Wyoming's program as well, although they seem to feel that the modifications they've made recently are very promising. So I'm hopeful that they are. I don't have a basis to know for sure. There's this blue thing about respondents compared changes in the base salary. One of the comments that routinely was made was that the ECA adjustment is based on the base salary of $40,000 that's in the model. And then it seemed to feel that that was always applied to 40,000. And in fact, the ECA, whether the estimated one that we've provided or the one that's actually been implemented, has in fact raised the base salary each year when there's been an ECA. And the base salary in the model is a little over $62,000 a year for an average for teachers. And so there's some divergence of views as to what the model's doing and how much it's making available for teachers. But the general argument was, in order to attract the teachers that we believe should be teaching in our schools, we need to pay them more than the model provides us, and we need to pay them, as a result of paying them more, we need to have larger classes than the model generates. That's why if you look at the reports, that the model generates, I don't remember the exact numbers without looking, 7,600 teachers and 7,200 are employed. Those are roughly the numbers that I think we've seen from the reports, but that's what's going on there. So there's concern that they would need more money to hire and retain the existing teachers and to hire more teachers. And they feel that the model doesn't provide enough resources for that. It's a controversial point. I'm happy to stop if need be, or keep rolling.
Any questions? President Beitman.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chairman.
I apologize.
Question on the ECA, is that applied to the base or the average?
Excuse me, I'm not sure I heard your whole question.
So do you apply the ECA to the base salary or the average salary?
Matt, I'm going to let Matt give you the technical how that works, so we're sure we get it right. If that's okay, Matt?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman and Senator Beitman, in theory, it is to the average because the model has increments or adjustments for years of experience in education. Whenever the legislature implements an ECA, that ECA is applied to those adjustments. So a district's average or the model's average salary will adjust all of those elements that make up that salary amount. So it is adjusted for, the ECA is applied to salary, the base salary, but it's also applied to each of those adjustments for experience in education. So.
Mr. Chair, that's my understanding as well. I just thought it best if he said something different, I'd rather he say it first. And then I'd admit my lack of knowledge. I'd rather be wrong after the fact.
Any other questions? Okay, Doctor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. The next one is the issue we briefly touched on earlier on fractional FTEs. And the problem is, again, the model actually generates a number of teachers in a school through, grade by grade. And the concern is if we have 17 students in grade 1, theoretically, the model only generates 1 teacher. Well, at 17, that's not a problem. At 24, that's a bigger problem. And again, if there's 24 in grade 1 and 24 in grade 2, that's 48, that's 3 teachers. And then the district needs to find ways to adjust that. So the model allocates teaching positions rounded to the nearest 10th. So you'll see numbers in a school that says, yes, they get 12.6 teachers plus 20% more of that. And what I would say is that is not a problem that's unique to the state of Wyoming or to any other state that has large numbers of small rural schools. It happens in giant school districts as well. Children just don't show up in even numbers. You have problems where, some grades have enough fewer students that you have substantially smaller classes than in other grades, and you either need to have mixed grade classrooms or you have these very wide variations in size, and districts make different choices as to how to do that. The call was, at least in one person indicated that as soon as you have the 17th student, you should generate the second FTE, and as soon as you have the 33rd, you should generate a third FTE teacher. That, of course, would create class sizes way lower than the 16. It'd be about 8.5. So that probably is challenging in terms of A, the cost, B, the ability to find that many teachers, and C, class sizes that small. There's probably there's in my mind no evidence that would suggest that would be a necessary number. And average class sizes in Wyoming, particularly in the smallest districts, tend to be often substantially below the 16 or the 21. So those already exist. So it's, yes, it's a challenge. It exists in every school district, and it's in my mind, and I tell my students this as well, it's a leadership challenge. And it's something that as a school leader, as a school principal, you need to find the best solution within the mix of personnel that you have and work with your district leadership. And in most small, particularly small districts in Wyoming, I'm sure the superintendent talks to the principals on an extremely regular basis. Even in a district of 11 or 12,000 students, they're probably communicating a great deal more than in districts of 100,000 students or something like that. So they're concerned about fractional FTEs. We think we've created the best possible solution to that issue and what can happen, and don't have a better answer, but it's important to indicate that I'm just reporting what we heard, right? So I'm just a messenger here today. And I want to respect the hard work that all of the panelists put in and the things they told us about, because it's very important. On more mental health counselors, which the judge also suggested were needed, I think they felt that we need more than even the model generates at the middle and high school levels. And I may have mentioned this earlier. I'm trying to remember everything I said earlier. Not only for students, but they felt there's need for mental health services for district staff as well. That the challenges that they face every day in working with children who come with challenges and concerns are greater than they used to be. And there's been, particularly since COVID, lots of issues around burnout and challenges with teaching, and that there need to be additional services for staff. That may be something that could be addressed, not necessarily through hiring staff in the school district specifically for teachers, but through the health insurance plans, get mental health services through health insurance plans. But that's, I think, something we'll consider as we move on the recalibration. At least I think that would be where I would start if I answered that question. I think I just did the last one. No, I did not. I'm sorry. Nurses, the challenge in the model allocates one nurse for a fairly large number of students, which means there is not a nurse in every school. I think it would be desirable in many people, in many of the respondents' minds, many of the participants' minds, to have a nurse in every school. I think they recognize that some schools where that's just not possible, there just are so few students, it's expensive and probably not a good use of a nurse's time, particularly given, as I understand, in the state of Wyoming, nurses are in relatively limited supply as well. I don't have a firm answer, but we worked on some challenges in Colorado where we tried to find ways for positions that move around a lot or are shared to do so more efficiently. And we'll try to weave those into what's happening here. Again, Colorado's not Wyoming, but they do have large swaths of small school districts that are, across vast distances. So it may give us some help. And then they felt, as I mentioned, we don't have any instructional aides. They want more paraprofessionals. They want instructional aides in classrooms, particularly at the kindergarten and early elementary levels. I talked about that earlier. I don't need to hit it again unless somebody wants me to. I mentioned the newcomer centers for the sudden influx of ELL students, and that came up more recently in our meetings, but the issue is, and I don't remember if it was Teton or another district that was also sharing it, that just suddenly there were many, many more students, and they not only need to deal with the children, but the challenges their families face when they first arrive, and how do they integrate into the community, how do they find jobs, which isn't only a responsibility of the school district, but school districts turn out to be pretty good organizations to at least provide a coordinating location for whomever pays for the services and the people who help with it. And then, of course, to help with the children themselves in school and what goes on. And then one of the concerns, whether it comes to efficiency or other things, is around closing schools when enrollments really become much too low to support it, and it really would be more efficient. Before I go on, it looks Senator McKeon wants to ask a question.
Yes. Senator Kuhn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to make sure I heard you correctly. We're going to have a center run by a school district to help find parents jobs.
Mr. Chairman, Senator McKeon, if you heard that, and you may have, that was not what I intended to impart, so I apologize. What I was trying to say is a newcomer center that a district establishes to help children get into classes and get organized could also serve as a location where county employees, nonprofit employees, other individuals who are helping whole families resettle in a strange new place could also get support and help. That as a measure of efficiency, all the organizations would work together. Hopefully in this newcomer center, that would also be temporary until people slow down in the number who are coming and families have been settled. So no, I was not suggesting the school district find parents jobs. I apologize if that was implied, and I thank you for clarifying.
Yes, follow up.
So the newcomer center is going to be a building with the different organizations in it. So they're just going to be like shared tenants. And they're not.
So, Mr. Chair, Senator McKeon, they take various forms. There are many schools that actually have space in them that could, so you need a classroom. If you have a classroom that's empty in your school, they'll probably meet all the needs right there. If you don't, maybe there's another county office or another facility or an empty office building or something somewhere. The idea is there's one location that serves as a hub to help serve families who've recently moved in with language challenges. And it would be a temporary thing. And I wouldn't think that it would be the responsibility of the school system or the state to be providing funding for non-education related services. I'm only suggesting that there's a vast literature it's a much better literature than it's been ever had success in making happen in shared social services, combined social services. That is, counties provide a great deal of services for families who need help beyond just their children. And there's a fair amount of evidence that if you can help a whole family, it's good for students and help learning. If the county could move resources to schools where everybody's close to, it would be easier for families to get those services. That's very hard to do. If there's no room in a school, you can't do it. Other agencies are always basically afraid of the 800-pound gorilla in the room, which is the school district taking over the resources. So these are challenging things that require cooperation among lots of agencies and organizations. And what I intended to say, and what I would like to be on record is meaning to say, okay? So again, thank you for the clarification, is that all organizations that support families who move in, particularly when they move in fairly substantial numbers for the community, and have issues around language and other things, that they all work together. And the school district may be the best place to centralize that if they have the space or the facilities, but they also have schools closer to everybody than anybody else, typically. That's really all I intended. So I apologize for any confusion. Thank you.
So Dr. Pikus, let's finish this slide and then let's take a break here.
Be happy to do that. So the other issue that always comes up is the issue of closing schools. And when schools get too small and are particularly inefficient, that makes a great deal of sense, often financially. The basic message was, and it's not a surprising message or anything I'm sure you don't hear from your constituents, is rural communities don't want to give up their school buildings because they often serve as community centers. That is, they serve as a school during the day. And again, it kind of gets back to the same issue of combining services, but they're community buildings. They're used for other meetings, other organizations in the evening. They serve as places where people gather. And one of the challenges always with closing schools, and has made it controversial any place, is the need for that kind of facility. And again, I guess my thinking would be where that comes up is that the possibilities to find ways to share in the costs of maintaining those facilities over time. But I'm happy to stop there pending any other questions.
Yes, Co-Chairman Heiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question before we break. Going back to the mental health counselors, if these counselors are employed by the school district, you've got them in the school system during the school year, but then during the summer months, we have a gap. So the students need mental health resources during the school year. What happens during the summer months when these resource counselors are not available? I'm sure this this continuity needs to continue, but you're breaking that up, and there may be a gap there. What I've seen in some other states is they're contracting with external therapists or organizations so that can continue throughout the summer rather than being employed by the actual school district. Is that something that you have seen or you're contemplating? What's the idea there?
Our organization is an entity.
Siri was on.
My phone took off on that one, and I apologize. I don't think that was a proper answer for you, sir, so I'll try again on my own. That's a problem with artificial intelligence, I think. There's a variety of models that can address that. One would be to give mental health counselors annual contracts instead of 9-month contracts and have them available. It may mean fewer of them in the summer, so some have, shorter or longer contracts, or longer contracts, but there's no gap in the summer, but some work the first half, some work the second half of the summer. There's just a wide range of models. Mike, I don't know if you've seen any other possibilities?
It has partially to do with the year-long coverage, but partially to do with the fact that a lot of smaller districts can't hire someone full-time, so they do contract with other entities. So, and this is something we see, especially now with nursing and mental health issues and counselors, is there just aren't enough of them, especially when you get to small rural places. So in Michigan, we heard a lot about this, where they would do telehealth, where they'd contract with someone where the kids would have someone, but they would be online for them because they could not afford and they couldn't even find a person to be there full-time. So that's always a possibility.
And that dovetails with one of the special ed recommendations from 5 years ago, where many districts were flying special ed specialists from Portland or Seattle once a week, and the costs of that are phenomenal. And the suggestion was most, if not all, but generally most of the meetings be held online, and that in-person assessments not be ignored, but be less frequent, as long as you could see the client online. So that's a growing trend to cover distances and take people who are highly trained and have them do what they're highly trained to do and not drive cars or fly in airplanes.
Okay, any other questions? Okay. With that, then, let's take a 15-minute break and come back. Thank you. Okay, we'll come back to order. Doctor, I know you have some slides left. Let's continue the process, and so.
Mr. Chair, I have 8 slides left. Let me just get it shared back up again, so you see them, and we'll be all set. I took them down for the break, but there we are. So there's I have 8 slides, and I'll proceed forward and follow your leadership, and then I'm available all day tomorrow, so if we need to revisit issues, whatever works.
Yeah, so I think my intent is we'll get through these slides. We may be done early today. However, when you're finished, it's my intent to take public comment for those who perhaps will not be here tomorrow.
Okay.
But we will have public comment, assuming my co-chair wishes that. We'll have that perhaps tomorrow, so.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll endeavor to move quickly through these so that there's time for public comment, and then if clarification is needed tomorrow, again, I'm following your lead, sir.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so we've talked about salary levels already. They come up with financial issues as well as in personnel issues. The concern over level salaries and not enough, and the minimum salary in the model and all those things. I don't need to revisit that. There was concern around how the 8.5% ECA will, quote, get eaten up. That is, in terms of catching up from the past, that they've been behind, that infrastructure and insurance costs have grown and gone up very quickly as well, and then the need to increase model salaries to keep up with neighboring states. So they're looking at that in terms of how that 8.5% will be allocated and spent, and those are some of the issues that have come up of things that will need to be addressed as they look at the what may not feel like as much money as it sounds like. So that's where they're going. And there were concerns about the regional cost adjustment. And I guess the summary of the regional cost adjustment discussion is the higher your particular index on your location on the index, the happier you are with it. But the main message that came through was nobody would be happy if the index dipped below 100 for any district, even though economic theory would suggest that really makes the most sense. Conceptually, the people who would be harmed by having a floor of 100 are those who are further up the chain, because those districts at 100 who might be lower could compete more efficiently, or at least that's what an economist would tell you. So that's the big concern on the RCA. Again, a strong feeling that the block grant is a better way to allocate the resources and make choices, and a strong message that they would prefer that to categorical or mandated services as the model is adapted and adjusted. There's a concern about wide revenue swings for very small districts with school cliff effects. And we worked on this once. We're going to look at it again. I'm working with a couple of people who have some new ways to think about kind of running this. But the problem is there's an approach for a very small school, and then when it reaches a certain size, the model treats it differently. And there can be as much as $100,000 or $150,000 swing with the change in one student. And that's very challenging for school districts. So I think at one time, all we could propose was sort of a mini hold harmless provision to ease them in and out of it. And that gets hard because sometimes those swings happen 2 times in a 5-year stretch or more often. So we will relook at that and see if there's a way to smooth that curve a little bit. I'm looking at Senator Rothfuss. Maybe I'll get him to come out and he'll help me figure it out. Again, there were concerns with using the state health insurance system. There were concerns that the premiums for the state pays haven't changed in 4 years, which has been restrictive, feeling that the system didn't provide the kind of benefits they wanted to offer to their employees. I do have an appointment, I hope this week, to talk with the CFO in Casper, or here in Natrona County, where they do use the state system, to understand how that works. So that's been a concern. In our mind, using the state system is really the best way to go, but we do think that we'd be more expansive in the employees who would be eligible and who would be funded through the system than the current model is. Also, there are concerns about liability insurance. Generally, the cost of liability insurance, something that came up in the conversations here and with the SROs is as I understand it, the Previously, it was illegal to have a weapon or a gun in a school, and that now concealed weapons with permits can be brought to schools. There was concern that this would lead to additional growth in liability insurance costs because of the potential for additional weapons in schools on whatever side of what's happening is there. So there are concerns about how that would cause additional costs. And that also factors into the conversations about SROs, which was long and sophisticated and I thought very productive. Issues around cash flow itself, the allowable reserve levels, which I mentioned earlier, that you've raised them up to 30% because of the shift in transportation and special ed. I think the message is we prefer that not go away, that the cap stay at 30% and the money be available when they need it to cover, and that would also help if there were unusual special ed circumstances that weren't reimbursed in the same year, issues around that. Again, the timing of reimbursement programs, they were like closer to the year in which the expenses occur. And then, again, the concern about the shift back to 15% reserves that they feel would be problematic. There's also a considerable concern over the loss of federal ESSER dollars. As we talked earlier about federal resources, and there was a question that Mike answered about the uncertainty. There was a lot of ESSER money around COVID in school districts for 3 or 4 years. That dramatically changed what locals raised or how much money was available for schools. In theory, it was supposed to be one-time money. Many districts wove it into their fabric of their continuing expenditures and now are feeling the pain of that. That's a concern that school districts have, and they're not sure what to do as they think about tighter budgets than they had before. So they're concerned about that. The evidence-based model is the evidence-based model. We're going to provide an estimate of what it costs to provide that education and not to replace resources that have disappeared from some special circumstance. So that's how we would approach this issue. Resources for routine maintenance are inadequate. There's a feeling that the dollars aren't enough. The research on which our model is based is quite old, although the one organization that does issues around education facility maintenance, it's mostly higher ed, continues to cite the source we cited from 1975 as one of the main sources. A graduate student and I found it in 2005. We used it because we didn't find anything better. We talked to the authors who I think have since passed away. And then Alan was looking at something and he says, it's funny, it goes back to California Association of School Business Officers and this guy named Zurich. I said, yeah, Alan, don't you remember? That's who we used 20 years ago. So we believe that there are some better ideas. And Matt has suggested that we also talk to the consultants who work on the major maintenance issues, that there may be some procedures and ways to think about it that would be much better. And that the two systems might maybe work better together as well, so that there's a smoother transition and there is encouragement to spend money on routine maintenance so the needs for major maintenance are reduced or held off longer within the lifespan of the building. There's a sense that central office resources have grown faster than the model funding. I heard less about the number of personnel in the central office than I did about there's some per pupil resources that are included in the central office budget allocation that are supposed to include insurance costs, which they felt have grown substantially beyond the growth in the model, liability insurance, property insurance, casualty insurance, all of those insurance things have gone up and they need to have those. A sense that legal fees have gone up, that there's, in a much more litigious society, they talk to their lawyers more often, so legal fees have increased. There's some need, somebody mentioned the need for daycare for their employees. I don't know if that's a central cost issue, a central district issue or not, but again, I'm reporting what we heard. And the costs of audits have grown as well.
Yes. Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the insurance question, this is something that's come up over the last few years many times, and so we're talking about the district-wide insurance on buildings and basically their risk pool. Are there any other states that utilize more of a statewide risk pooling model like we do with government claims and other such things? Is there a way that we could capture the risk at the state level instead of having all of our districts pay insurance companies to insure them, and to a large degree they're insuring based on circumstances that might be existing in other states and aren't necessarily specific to the state of Wyoming? I'm just wondering if there's a way that we could put that risk together, aggregate across the state, and do it in a way that would benefit our districts and save us some money. Any thoughts on that? I don't know if anybody out there's done anything like that, but I'm curious about it.
I'm going to let Mike answer this as well. He may have some additional thoughts. In talking at the PJ panels, several people indicated there are some pools here in Wyoming that currently exist, that the districts have combined their efforts and built insurance pools. And most of the time when a district or the district's broker shops for insurance, they talk to the pools and talk to what they can get individually, and then buy the least expensive insurance for the coverage that they need. So that does exist. The only state which I'm really familiar enough with to comment on is California. There's not a statewide insurance pool there, but they do have these things called joint powers agreements. And the JPAs are formed with groups of school districts that then purchase varieties of insurance. And JPAs often have different memberships for different types of insurance. So there may be a health benefit JPA that includes some districts, and a casualty insurance or liability insurance. So it's something that's done a lot and frequently. It's done here in Wyoming to some extent. Whether a state pool to do that or not would be more cost effective. It's one of those questions that until you try it, you don't know. And then when you set it up, unless everybody participates, you never really are sure how that works. And if it doesn't work and it gets messed up, then how would you add that to the evidence-based model? It would be sort of a additional cost that really wasn't buying you additional student performance, I don't think. Mike, what else am I missing?
No, that's sort of the national picture. I do not know of a state that does a full state pool. Like Dr. Pikus was saying, I do know groups of school districts who have kind of bound together. I also know, and this is sort of a trend, where a couple of districts have tried to self-insure, which can be risky. I think one of the reasons you don't see like a statewide pool is because in most states, the problems or the issues are so different that, if you're in a place that's more prone to flooding or hurricanes or tornadoes, you're not, they don't want you in the pool kind of thing. So that's one of the issues that is sort of there.
And that's one of the things that makes Wyoming a bit unique, and I was curious if anyone else did it, right? We, the state, are responsible for uniform funding, so aggregating risk across the state actually makes sense in the state of Wyoming. But I don't know whether it ends up making sense at the end of should we do it? You can see some upside to it. On the liability side and probably on some of the other insurance sides, we have statutory caps in place. We have some government protections in place that, from my understanding in conversation, aren't even acknowledged in some of the insurance contracts that our educational institutions enter into. And this is both at the university and college level as well as the district level. So they don't actually benefit from the protections we statutorily provide because they write what is effectively a relatively standard contract. And then that contract is what they're insuring for, and they might not even need all of the components effectively of that contract based on state risk. So I'm curious if there's anything that we can do from a state risk standpoint where we have the power of statute. We might be able to look to ways that we can mitigate risk, use government claims caps and other risk mitigation, and then couple that with risk pooling in a way that could potentially save a significant amount of money. And I don't know whether it could or not, but it's a thought, and there's probably a lot of people out in this room that are expert in this space that may have ideas as well. But it sounds like that isn't something that's been looked into, and it's something that I would be curious about. Also, we might not be talking about enough money to really worry about it, and that would be something else to know whether this would be worth a problem that we could try and tackle, or whether it's too insignificant to really try and solve through this. So maybe some follow-up on that at some point. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
President
Thank you.
Bateman.
Thank you. Kind of dovetailing with that, doesn't the Wyoming Governmental Claims Act cover liability for districts? So when they mention with the concealed carry law being passed, that applies, school districts are covered under the Wyoming Governmental Claims Act for tort law, correct?
I'm not comfortable enough to speak on Wyoming state law or how insurance carriers would treat the potential existence of guns in schools or not. So I really can't answer that question. What I'm reporting is that at every panel, somebody expressed concern that they were concerned that their liability insurance would increase. If we can look and see if that's really not going to happen or not. I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so it's really just, I'm just reporting back what I heard in this instance. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chairman. Senator McEwen and then Representative Ian.
I want to go back to the daycare bullet
Okay,
for central office employees. Would that be a daycare setup that they pay for, or would that be provided?
I don't know. Somebody suggested that there were daycare needs in the district and I think it should be part of the model. I don't necessarily know that that's anything that's going to change student outcomes or performances or something we would look at in any way. We think preschool is very important for the children who live in the district, but we've not given thought to or building into our model after-school daycare for children in schools whose parents work beyond the hours of school, or issues of daycare for parents of toddlers who have full-time jobs in a school or in the central district. There was just somebody said, we need daycare. So I'm just reporting back my notes, sir. I'm not suggesting it's going to show up in this report at all.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yep. Representative Ian.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Dr. Pikus. I'm curious on whether there were any thoughts from the PJPs or yourself of other fixed central office costs that we could centralize basically within the state. So whether it's things that we require for reporting, right? So data systems that every school district has, but might have different data systems, so they have different reporting, or HR or anything else like that.
So there was, Mr. Chair, Representative Ian, there were sort of the two things that come up is one is that centralized system for reporting so that you reported the data once rather than on several different forms. And then the state somehow made it work. And whether that would require the state to require everybody to use the same system or not, I don't know, but there were concerns with many of the systems that schools buy for HR and other things, that there's often a minimum. That is, you get a license for a flat amount plus so much per student or so much per employee. And that many times they have 125 employees and the system requires that what they've chosen requires that they purchase at least 250, a license for at least 250. So clearly you could create economies of scale by moving up to the state level for something like that. There also was concern about technology infrastructure and technology purchases and costs and providing services, and a sense that it may be that larger, and particularly computer security. One of the real concerns is the growing costs of keeping computers secure, keeping things online secure, and keeping people from breaking into the systems. Also, the cost of ransomware insurance was another central office cost or technology cost that came up quite regularly. So all of those issues, and often a suggestion that perhaps these are things that could be moved up to be state level matters. My understanding is in some instances the state already does some of those things. So it's a question of identifying which ones make the most sense to add to that or continue if that's helpful.
Mr. Chairman, just to follow up, I mean, maybe those are some things that we should think about for our following meetings of things that we could save costs on and centralize for things that every single district, and especially for those smaller districts where, like Dr. Pike has said, there's a fixed cost, a fixed minimum cost, but those smaller districts might not have the number of employees that a larger district like Natrona County or in Cheyenne would have.
Mr. Chair, one additional thing. I know that the Department of Education does computer security audits of school districts, and I'm working to set up a meeting with two people at the department who are responsible for those. There may be an email in my stack without setting a time, but our hope is to talk Tuesday or Wednesday of next week. So it's on our agenda as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could you please reiterate who the stakeholders were who participated in these panels?
Mr. Chair, Representative Kelly, it was a wide and diverse group of people mostly from school districts. Some, they range from teachers to school principals. There may or may not have been an assistant principal. There were some counselors. There were special ed teachers. There were several, very frequently, central office staff, in particular, people who worked in finance offices, and a large number of superintendents. There were also board members, some community members, and some retired board members. And we'll provide a list of everybody who attended as part of our report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to make sure I'm processing the information correctly. So being asked about the funding model for the public school system, the people being asked are primarily people who work within the public school system, which makes sense. But we get back, what they like is being able to spend money any way they wish, and what they want is more money. I don't know if that's exactly groundbreaking here, but I would like to ask this as far as because it's been reiterated twice about the block grant. I'm looking here that in the last several years, the number of students is down, the number of teachers is down, the number of paras is down, yet the number of school administration, the number of central administration is up during that same period of time. Are the teachers really averse to the legislature making a move to increase and protect their salaries?
Mr. Chair, Representative Kelly, I'm going to let you ask the representatives of the teachers that question, if that's okay. I'm just reporting what I heard, but yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, talking more about the central office and the things there, I just wondered on the top of my head, do you have any idea if there's any districts that do any cost sharing for like the legal fees or the audits or anything like that? I mean, I have three districts in my county. And I just wonder if there's anybody that does that sort of thing. I think it would be pretty efficient, but it probably just is not feasible with the block grant, but I'm not sure. Do you have any information on that?
I want to be sure, Senator Schiller, the angles of these things lead me to see the word representative first, right in front of you. So I want to be careful I get the right person. No, it's Representative Yin. It's perfectly fine. It's just the nature of where I'm sitting, not you all. So I just started and then I would catch myself. I want to be clear. You're asking about the availability of organizations to try to audit district.
Well, for instance, districts, I know contract their legal people, they contract their auditors and that sort of thing. I'm just thinking, like in my county, we have 3 districts. Would it be feasible with the block grant that they could cost share those things, have the auditors all, I mean,
Mr. Speaker.
I don't know if it'd save money or if it'd just be a pain in the neck.
Senator Schiller, that sort of happens in its own way because legal advice is typically provided by lawyers who specialize in school district issues, and it's probably far broader than just the 3 districts in your county. Lawyers specialize, as you know, and there are lawyers who very much specialize in school district legal issues, and there's a market for that. There are certain accounting firms that do public accounting as part of their specialization. They tend to be more localized, I think, than larger law firms across the state because they have to come in and spend a lot of time looking at financial records, so it's tricky to move across the state to do that, whereas lawyers can do a lot of their work without leaving their law offices. So it just varies, but employing a lawyer full-time is very expensive and leaves you in a spot where your lawyer may not really know the answer to the specific question, and then you end up retaining lawyers for that as well. So districts, except for very large districts, have typically not had in-house lawyers. And you can pick the lawyer who knows the matter you need to talk about. So, there's one of the trustees of our school has made apparently a fair amount of money providing legal services around human resources issues to school districts for at least the last 40 years. Okay, so, but she won't answer questions about slips and falls in a school or other things like that. She'll refer you to another lawyer. So those sort of efficiencies kind of, in theory, grow up organically. So I don't know whether there would be efficiencies otherwise or not. But my guess is the school leaders kind of talk about those things and figure that out. That's my sense from the people I work with where I am, more so than conversations with school leaders here in Wyoming.
Okay, any other questions? I know you need to get through these.
Yes, I'm sorry, I'll proceed forward. So we did that one. Other issues, okay, there's been support for preschool. The evidence-based model would recommend preschool. There's the question of how you count ADM, and we had that conversation in April. What's the best way to do it to make sure we get accurate counts? SROs, we spent a lot of time talking about SROs at all of the sessions. One of them we spent over an hour. They're concerned about the impact of more weapons in schools and the need for SROs. Also conversation about SROs and providing security at evening events, not just during the school day, which makes sense. In fact, I argued that may be more important as people go out to football game and things grow. They argue that the public sees SROs as essential in schools. I would say that the consensus of what an SRO is it's a trained law enforcement individual, someone who's got law enforcement training and carries a weapon, and districts would think that most high schools need one, maybe most or several middle schools, and then they'd be shared across elementary schools. And they all agree that the way to do this is to work closely with the law enforcement agency where their district is located, the sheriff or the police, to contract for those services and find ways to share costs. Again, we would argue that some of those costs are the responsibility of the law enforcement agency because they should be providing law enforcement services generally, but finding ways to cooperate across agencies and ensure that there are individuals serving as SROs, trained as SROs, and the kind of conflict resolution issues that they're more likely to face in the school. And then you also undo the issues of training, insurance, uniforms, equipment, and you also provide, when schools aren't in session, employment for the SROs within the law enforcement community as well, and coverage for vacations and sick leave and things in other ways. So that seems to be my sense of where the consensus in the PJ panels was. We've been looking at the literature, which doesn't actually seem that different. Some of the literature seems to suggest things very much like that. Some seems to emphasize conflict resolution a little more than the law enforcement, legally trained law enforcement officers. But it's not clear. And my sense of it is what the public seems to want is probably where this conversation is likely to go in terms of having SROs. Things seem pretty consistent in what people at the meetings told us. Food nutrition services, I guess the answer is I heard you. We will work to see what kinds of options exist and models exist for if you were to decide you were going to subsidize food services with state funds, how that might work. We've had a long talk about CTE already. There's a general sense that funding is inadequate. Dr. Hill pointed out the need for those services. They also talked about issues around contracting for services. As we talked about one of the points today in maintenance, sometimes you can't afford to have a full-time air conditioning repair person working in your district. You would contract for services, but the money that would have bought that maintenance person is available for that kind of contracting as well. And so, I don't know that there's need for more resources. If you're going to, there seems to be a need for more lawyers, things like that. So there may be more money in that pot in the central office. Certainly, that's what we're hearing from the PJ panels. I think we've talked about all of these technology issues. I even caught the ransomware before it showed up here. So I won't go through them all again. Mr. Chair seems to be telling me that as well. Small school just for cliff effects. Funds should, oh yeah, the assessment. There's some question of whether you need more than the Y-TOPS, which is paid for by the state. This is, and the general feeling was, yes, they needed resources to do interim assessments between the annual assessments at the end of each school year to understand how students are performing. And then student activities, we've talked about that as well, and the cost of it. And then the other big one that came up, and one of the last three issues is the state has a growing number of students who are either homeschooled or educated in alternative locations that aren't part of the public system. But currently, as I understand it under Wyoming law, those children are eligible to participate in the student activities programs, which incur real costs to the school district, which are not reimbursed in any way, yet they're eligible to do that. The estimate was about 4,000 or 5,000 students like that across the state. So that's something of a concern and something of an issue in terms of that issue around student activities. I'm pretty sure that's the last one. Oh, cost efficiencies. Consolidation, technology, food services maybe. There wasn't any conversation around district consolidation at all. Streamlining state reporting and the block grant. Several people said the way to keep us efficient is the block grant. It lets us make the decisions as to where to apply the resources to be used most effectively. And then these are, I think we've covered all of these issues already. I think that's the end. Yes, it is.
Great. Well, Dr. Pike is very valuable information, so appreciative. Are there any questions before we go to the next phase here? Okay, thank you.
And I will be here all day tomorrow.
Yes, you will.
I'm happy to continue to answer questions as is appropriate. So thank you.
Appreciate that. So what I'd like to do now is give an opportunity again for public testimony. If you look at your agenda tomorrow, there's going to be also ample time for public comments, but I want to open it now for those folks who perhaps won't be here tomorrow, so that your voice can be heard. So please, for those who feel a need now, please come on up and just give your name and give you the opportunity. Hello.
Hello, Charles Oski, Superintendent in Johnson County School District Number 1. I have my board chair here with me, Travis. I'm going to let Travis speak first, and then I'm going to kind of just go through some key points. But before we do that, I want to say thank you. I mean, it's been expressed several times. You guys are in a tough position. So I'm going to let Travis speak, and then I just want to bring up a few key points.
I'm Travis Pearson from Johnson County, Wyoming. It's been my honor to serve as chairman for the Johnson County Board of Trustees for School District 1. But I didn't want to talk as the board chair. I can't represent the whole board without a vote. I wanted to talk as an entrepreneur. When I hired on the first time as a professional land surveyor in the state of Wyoming in 2001, I got paid $45,000 a year. That was my base pay with a fully benefited position. I just hired another PLS to work for my company. It cost me $65,000 a year. The price of labor has changed over time. Our model hasn't. If we adjust that model base pay up into the $60,000 range, what it's costing for professional services, that'll straighten out almost all the rest of the issues that you saw on the board. My math's real simple and not near as fun as the doctor's stuff, but it's real. I'm living it. That's what I'm paying for labor. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so for a quick history, for those of you that, a little background for me, I'm a former CTE teacher for 16 years in a district, been in administration, small rural community, superintendent of a small school district throughout that. One of the things I want to just tell you in the 35 years I've been here, that we haven't increased the hours in the day. A lot of things we're talking about here today is how do we provide everything that we would like to see our kids get in a short amount of time. I can speak right now as a superintendent. Our schools are open about 7:30, and you look at most of the buildings, especially the high schools, they're probably open until 9 or 10 at night. So they're very involved within what that community looks like. So we've talked about, I've heard people talk to you about the basket of goods. I've heard you talk about certification and teachers throughout that process. But one word I want to throw out there also as a superintendent and what we deal with the board is the word accountability. So what are we held accountable for in that process? I can also throw out some other things. We are competing with the CTE world as a vocational teacher, unlike we were before when we talk about concurrent and dual enrollment. We have a lot of kids that want to take college classes, get the college credits with their families, so that's a competitive piece with the CTE, in the CTE world, to be honest with you. When you live in communities that have a junior college, have amazing CTE facilities, and we still have a shortage, some of it isn't about what we can offer in our community. Some of it is just about the needs of where we're at. And I'm gonna speak from myself. We just heard that you're missing, there's 100 and some positions open. There's a lot of welding positions open, and some of those salaries are $120,000. Who's gonna go be a teacher, because it takes a special person to be a teacher when they can make probably double the salary in the field that they're gonna teach in. So it takes a special unique, so that's a competition that we're in, is we don't have CTE teachers either. Well, when you're competing against the market and they can offer salaries that we can't offer, most of them are gonna work in that industry as far as what that goes through. The next thing I wanna talk about is just facilities themselves. With declining enrollment, Johnson County School District since 2019 has seen a decline of enrollment of about 200 kids. And it's not because of the education. 50% of our population is 50 and older, and it's gonna, in the next 5 to 6 years, 50% of our community is gonna be 60 and older. So in that competition of, just the declining enrollment, our buildings, competing with CTEs, that accountability piece, there's a lot of things that we do to try to get as efficient as we can across the board. But it's not just as simple as just adding money to the model or increasing CTE programs. It's hiring the personnel, it's having the facilities to do it. There's another question that came across the table also about after-school programs, extended days. When you live in Wyoming and at 3:30, you want to keep kids after school, that means you have to get them on a bus and get them home if you're going to keep them for another hour, an hour and a half. And when we are short on transportation drivers already, they leave and then they come back and they don't get back from their routes at 5:30, and then you have to turn around and send them back out again. Those could be some long days for what some of those. So what we focus on is trying to do it during the day. So whether those interventions can happen during the day, whether, our focus of trying to be a PLC district where you're talking about the data, we've heard you talk about that intervention piece, the enrichment. Let's not forget about enrichment, because you have kids at the other end too. So it's not just about trying to get the low end kids up, it's about trying to enrich those kids on the other end. So there's a lot that goes along with this, but it comes back to my original comment, is there's still only, in some cases, 8 hours in a day. And that's a long day. Most schools are not an 8-hour day when we look through that piece. But after-school activities for us in our community are difficult to say you're going to provide any type of program, because that's usually when you deal, an IEP is being held, an at-risk meeting. There's so many other meetings that those teachers have to take place with after school with those families, that those quality teachers are trying to connect there, that offering an after-school program to catch kids up is really not something that it's very tricky. The other part I want to bring to that I think is a huge success point, two points, because we always want to talk about the positive. There are a lot of things being done well. There are some things we can do better. I mean, I'm going to be as transparent as I can. But one of the things we brought into Johnson County School District, what Sheridan 2 does, is called a parent liaison. It's not a counselor, but it is an organization. It's called Thrive out of Bozeman, if you'd like to look into it. And there's a lot of data that shows that this individual, which is funded through a couple grants and partially paid for by the district, connects families with school and community resources. Those families that are struggling, we're showing that we're connecting those families with the school, connecting them to resources in the community, which keeps kids in school. Because when parents are struggling or things are not good at home, that brings some of the social issues in there. So I would encourage you to look into that. We can bring that back to the table and show you, but the organization is called Thrive. It's out of Bozeman. It's been very successful in a lot of Montana schools. Sheridan 2 is doing it well. And I want to say Johnson County is on the road to doing it well also. The other part, and Mr. Christensen, I'm going to let you speak if you can later, with this is we talk about collaboration. Johnson County, Sheridan County School District number 1, number 2, number 3, Sheridan College, the governor's office with the RIDE, and 2 Revs and the Whitney Foundation are all doing a collaborative effort over the last 18 months to look at getting what I call project-based learning. We're also looking at getting mentorships, getting kids into the communities and into industry, connecting them with industry so they get the real world experience, so they are prepared. So there are districts and examples of some of the things that we are doing to try to connect what I want to say, school districts to communities and to industry. I would love to be able to get them to come and present to you, but when you talk about collaboration, those are some of the things we're doing. In addition to that, we're taking a new approach. So it's called U-Science. It's an aptitude test. We start in 8th grade. So instead of putting kids on track on where they're interested in, we're actually trying to put them on track on what their skill set is. So we can start having those conversations so it connects to industry. So there are a lot of good things happening. I can say with the board that I have now and the leadership team we have in Johnson County, we do take things seriously. We try not to spend the money just throw it out the table. I mean, because we need to find a way to make sure it goes to our kids. So I appreciate your time. If there's questions, I would love to answer those, or we'll come back and meet with you again. But there's some just food for thought for you as a committee, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Any questions? Thank you. Appreciate that. Hi.
Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. Gillian Chapman. I'm the superintendent in Teton County School District in Jackson. And I wanted to respond to some of the conversation today. A quick chat GPT led me to the response that Senator McEwen was looking for. There are 33,000 jobs in tourism. It'll be an increase of 24% by 2030. And for every 100 workers statewide in travel and tourism, there are 67 job openings. I know Mr. Wilmarth will provide a more detailed explanation as promised. However, the other important thing that I wanted to bring to your attention that I think is germane to your conversation and the impact on communities and your conversation about recalibration and the cost of education, it's different in every single community in Wyoming. And the unique features of travel and tourism, it's the least paid industry out of everything. So if you look at mineral extraction, for example, all the way up to skilled and hazardous pay, you range anywhere from $60,000 to $110,000 plus. An oil driller makes $75,000 or $30 hourly. Versus a lift operator at Jackson Hole Mountain Resort, or a bartender, a server, or an airline representative, they are making somewhere between $15 an hour up to $19 an hour. Some bartenders make up to $24 an hour depending on tips. So the difference in wages is significant. And that's the only industry that we have in Jackson, Wyoming. The other interesting search that I did, the highest paid industries in Wyoming, mining, quarrying, oil and gas extraction, followed by financial and professional services. The highest paid occupations are obviously medical, dentist. Nowhere in there is there an educator or an administrator for an educator. So we have the most important people in our care that families entrust us with. That responsibility is not lost on us. We take it very seriously, and I'm really grateful that you all are listening to us, because this is what we live every single day. And every single one of the educators you have in Wyoming are passionate. They care deeply about every child in this state, and we want the best for every child in this state. Just like as parents, they want and they expect the very best. Our boards of education, locally elected, in our communities, have such high expectations for the educators and the administrators and the communities. The pressure is real because they have expectations for us, and they hold us to the highest level of accountability. So we take these charges quite seriously. The only industry in Jackson, as I said, is travel and tourism, yet the cost of living is 178% higher than the rest of the state. So I think it's important for you, as you consider the cost of education, we have the least paid individuals, and it's the highest cost of living. And so who are attracted to these low-paying jobs? Many of our opportunities for employment come from visitors from other countries and from people that want what's best for their children. They sacrifice immensely to come to our community and to work in the travel and tourism industry and to want the best for their children. So in Teton County, we had 85 students that moved into the area after school started in September that had little or no English experience. Some had no English or even formal education. And yet our school district welcomes them. We provide opportunities for them. And it costs more to educate kids that don't speak English. And Dr. Pikus brought up a newcomer center, and the definition that I would use as a newcomer center varies vastly from what he represented. I think it would be lovely to offer a community opportunity where you bring community agencies, you have a local spot for folks to come in. We don't have the physical space to do that. We don't have the staffing to do that. But we do offer intense English support for our students so we can get them up to speed very, very quickly. So a newcomer center in most cases refers to a location where all students who need various levels of English can come together and they have exclusive support in English. We don't have the resources to do that. Our students are educated in their home community school, and we have smaller class sizes to help them get up to speed. So I hope that you all recognize there are vast amounts of challenges in each community, and a one-size-fits-all really won't work. And so when you think about a comparative wage index, that works really great in many communities, but it won't work in Jackson because it's just completely opposite. The wages that we're being compared against, travel and tourism versus a financial analyst who may be working from home, or some of these other industries that make a lot more. And while I know we get extra points for having the amazing scenery, and I mean, it is beauty that doesn't exist anywhere else, but those beautiful views do not pay the rent on a $3,500 per month 1 or 2 bedroom apartment. And that's what's considered affordable or workforce housing. So those views they just don't pay the rent. So when you're looking at 178% of the cost of living in Jackson, we spend 87 to 88% of our operating budget are on salaries and benefits, just so we can maintain our staff. And then our average tenure for employees in Jackson are 3.5 years. And that's well below the average in Wyoming. And with that, I will turn it to my colleague.
Thank you, co-chairs, and thank you to this committee. We really do appreciate the time and the work. I'm going to get into a little specifics about some of the components in the model. The first one being the regional cost adjustment. Right now we have 3, oh, go ahead.
Could you introduce yourself?
Sorry, I'm Kristen Mayo from Teton County. I'm the business manager. We have 3 different methodologies that are used. There's the Wyoming Cost of Living Index, the Hedonic Index, and the Comparative Wage Index. Currently in our funding model, we have a 2005 version of the Hedonic Index. This index, in my opinion, doesn't work because it has to be redone every time you need to refresh it. It doesn't have automatically renewing components. Somebody actually has to go in and touch it and redo it, which is why we're still using the 2005 version of that. The Wyoming Cost of Living Index renews every second quarter. It's published by the Wyoming Economic Analysis Division every second and fourth quarter. And then the comparative wage index, I haven't seen the most recent version of it. I don't think it's complete yet. I fear that it will have some of the same issues that the hedonic index has, in that it has to be touched and it has to be redone. So I would encourage, no matter which index or which methodology we use something that will automatically renew itself based on current economic situations, current economic standards, like the Wyoming Cost of Living Index. Sorry, my phone timed out. I have notes. The next one is, I think anytime you think about changing something in the model like the RCA, there's going to be big winners and big losers in the state. And you have to think about that. You also can't think about these components of the model in a silo. You can't think about the RCA all on its own and make a decision on that without knowing how the base salaries are going to change. If the base salary comes up, maybe the hedonic index now works for more districts. So it's easy to get focused in on this one piece of the model without looking at the whole picture. And the whole picture really contributes to the best education in the state. Looking at one piece and making a decision there without having the rest of the information is impossible. And that's where you're going to come up with harm versus success in educating our students. And then the last thing, the liability insurance increase, we did just get our renewal. We do have an increase in our liability insurance. We cannot be insured without having an additional policy in relation to the new legislation around firearms. It's $35,000 just for that rider this year.
Questions? Speaker Nyman.
I know, you're shocked. First time I've spoken all day, trying to take all this in. Kristen, I guess my question would be as far as just kind of piqued my interest there when you're talking about your increase on your premiums. Mm-hmm. Did your school district have metal detectors or anything like that as a preventative for us before the gun legislation come in? And did insurance companies give you any credit for or not for, or cost more because there was no preventative type of proactive measures for your insurance? And that, I mean, basically to me, and I've heard this several times today, is that law basically allows now legal, permitted law-abiding citizens. Up to now, our law has only kept out law-abiding gun owners. And so I would wonder if the school districts had metal detectors to prevent an unlawful act coming into the buildings and stuff, and was that considered, excuse me, was that considered in your insurance at all?
Thank you, co-chairs and Representative Neiman. We did not have metal detectors. We do have door locks with that you have to have an RFID card to get into our schools. They're open during certain times for students. It's not a conversation that we get to argue with the insurance. We say, this is what we need, and they say, we're going to provide this to you, but because of the new legislation, you have to have this in order to be insured. And I understand that it's really a difference between passing legislation that's intended to benefit the community versus the real life application of how an insurance company is going to look at that. We don't have any control over whether an insurance company is going to insure us or not insure us. So I wouldn't say that that's a choice we have. In order to renew our liability insurance, this is what we have to do.
Yes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess my only question is, had you ever been approached about the fact of any countermeasures that you had that would make your insurance less or more based on safety for the kids, other than having to ring in to be able to get in the facility?
Chairman, Representative Nyman, Speaker Nyman, we have not had the opportunity, the funding. We don't even have a secure vestibule at one of our schools. So we don't have the funding to purchase metal detectors or the staffing to man or stand there and monitor the metal detectors. The only thing that we were given as a carrot to decrease our cost for insurance would be to adopt the policy for staff and volunteers to conceal carry in the building. And so that saved us a little bit by adopting that policy, but it's still an expense that we had not anticipated. And that was the only negotiating power that we had, was adopt a policy for your staff and visitors. Then we may have had a decrease. And then we're actively pursuing having a secure vestibule for our students. The other challenge that we have, or for our high school, not just for students. The other challenge we have is the number of metal detectors that would be required at the entrances, and then the staffing that would be required to make sure visitors coming in and out, and also at events that would have a weapon that we'd have to screen and have a conversation with.
Thank you. I guess, Kristen, this is for you. Still confused on the, how the Wyoming Governmental Claims Act plays in with school districts buying liability insurance, because I thought the whole point of having the Wyoming Governmental Claims Act was so it covers governmental entities from liability. But now I hear that school districts are purchasing this insurance. Is it necessary, number one? Two, why? And three, what do we need to do at the state level to fix it?
Thank you, co-chairs and Senator Beitman. I think that's a great question, and it's not one that I had considered. We will take it back to our district and pose that to our insurance consultants that we work with, and I'll keep you posted to what that answer is.
Senator Rothfuss.
Thanks. How much is that insurance policy per year? You said that you have a $35,000 rider. I'm just curious, what's your policy, and do you have other policies that are similar?
Thank you, co-chairs and Senator Rothfuss. We do, it's part of our whole liability insurance, and I'm trying to remember the number off the top of my head. It's just over $500,000 for our entire liability. That has increased over the last 3 years significantly due to the cyber liability increase that we've had to add. I believe probably 4 years ago, we were sitting right around $350,000 for our liability insurance. It has increased significantly with the cyber and now this additional rider.
Yes, please.
With the cyber liability, is that giving, are they paying premiums if you get extorted? Is that what that's effectively doing?
Thank you, Co-Chair. Senator Rothfuss. They, for example, in the most recent breach that we saw nationwide, they came in and they helped us consult and hired attorneys to help us figure out what our path was, because the response from a specific company was pretty slow to react. So we felt like we needed to take those extra steps in protecting the data of our staff and students, so they covered that expense.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, appreciate that.
Co-Chairman, thank you. My name is Chase Christensen. I'm the Superintendent of Sheridan County District 3.
And I'm Annie Griffin, Superintendent of Washakie County School District 2 in Tinsley.
And I'm Shane Ogden, Superintendent in Park 16 Meeteetse.
We have one shared concern that we would like to address with regard to earlier comments based on fractional numbers in the model, fractional positions. And I think that Dr. Pikus did a tremendous job of addressing some of that issue. And he spoke specifically to where the model is calculating positions at 3.5 or 6.3, and how districts can use the block grant to treat that situation. We are the superintendents of the 3 smallest districts in the state, and we want to discuss a separate issue with regard to that fractional calculation within the model, and that's specific to a few positions. You heard quite a bit about instructional facilitators earlier today, instructional coaches, and their importance with how our students are educated, how our teachers are approaching their professional development. And really, this drives our ability to coach our teachers on the best education that we're trying to provide within our district. The next position is guidance counselors. I think you heard quite a bit about mental health counselors today. We don't have those in our districts because it's not funded within the model, but guidance counselors are. A guidance counselor is the person that's typically helping students think about their future careers, guiding our CTE programs, and working those types of jobs for our students. And then there's another category called pupil support staff. And you heard Dr. Pikus dump lots of positions into this pupil support staff, whether it vary from SROs to nurses to where mental health counselors do fall into that category. What I wanted to talk about with regard to fractional calculation and fractional positions in the model, my district specifically, in the model for an instructional facilitator, I'm funded at 0.13. For guidance counselors, 0.21, and for pupil support staff, 0.28. Those numbers together come to 0.62 of a position. I feel that a couple of those positions, specifically instructional facilitator and guidance counselor, are an important one that regardless of district size, those ones are such that they need to be present for the students so that we can be taking care of the needs that students have within those realms. And I'd like to see, and I think that's what we will share, is I'd like to see a minimum in the model of a 1 in those positions. And just, Dr. Pikus did talk about the fractional positions, but where it's 5.3, it may be a little bit easier to maneuver than where it's 0.12. Thank you.
So intense sleep, similar numbers. Our guidance is 0.24, our instructional coaches 0.15, and our pupil supports, which we use, of course, for our nurse, is 0.33. And so that gives you an idea of where we stand. Currently, in the position of superintendent, I'm also the special ed director. I'm also a trained instructional coach and an 18-year teacher. And so guess what I do? Go and be the instructional coach. And imagine how that feels when the superintendent's coming in doing the instructional coaching. There's a lot to that. There's relationships that are built, and I make a point to make very clear I'm not your evaluator, the principal is, and I am here to support you. But again, it would be much better served and much better professional development if it were coming from a true instructional coach. That's even better by far than sending our people out to conferences, because it's sustained, because it's something where when something we're working toward instructionally is happening, that's the person that's making sure that that continues and that that's truly meeting the needs of what our teachers need in terms of knowledge base to make those things happen in the classroom. So pass it on to you.
Mr. Chairman, thank you again for letting us be here and share a couple of thoughts. I'm the middle district of the three of us, so my numbers fall right in between the three, or between the other two. And certainly we talk about that, but then even if we were to add that into something else, trying to find somebody to relocate, if we're only going to be able to hire for a fractional of a position, trying to get someone to move to a small community is pretty hard. And with that, I know that there's a lot of conversations about, well, then let's talk about this efficiency of working with other districts and how does that work. And we oftentimes will use the analogy that Wyoming happens to be the smallest populated state in our nation. And we don't rely on Colorado or Utah to tell us what we need to do. As the three smallest districts, there's a great value that we have in our community by having a locally elected board who represents that community, not a larger community. And because of the block model, the way that it currently is, elected officials are the ones that decide budgets. It's not superintendents. We may make recommendations, but just a reminder that it's a school board that passes a budget. They're the ones who decide that. They are the elected officials for that community. So that local control, just like we have in Wyoming, I think is pretty important to us. Did I turn myself back off? Is pretty important to us in small communities just as much as it is in a large community.
Let me ask a question. How many students in each of your districts?
We were able to serve 83 of the best students in the state this year.
We had 108, and we are the #1 academic school in the state of Wyoming for the 2022-23 YTOP.
And we're right about 103, but that counts our pre-K program. We have a full day staffed pre-K that we pay partially out of our general funds.
Thank you. Anything else?
I do.
Yes,
If I could,
go ahead.
yes. Like, actually, I do. Okay. A couple of things I wanted to talk to you about. First of all, I want to say thank you for the reimbursement of special education funds. That's huge for our district. It's huge for all of us in the state of Wyoming. Also, the transportation being reimbursed, we appreciate that as well. Another piece I want to say I'm grateful for is the 30% set aside, because to give you an example, this coming year we have a large special education reimbursable, very large. And what that means for our district is if we didn't have that 30%, we would be taking a loan, we would be in trouble. It already is causing us some stress in terms of being able to give some of the increases we'd like to give to our staff, to be cutting budgets in other areas so that we can make sure that we have that money set aside. So ideally, to be able to have those instantly paid for, as we had those issues happening during the school year in special education, that would be ideal, but the reimbursable is appreciated as a secondary, I guess I should say. Couple of other things. The CTE categorical grant that just was passed the last session. I want to make clear that sometimes I think when those categorical grants are put out, people have wonderful intentions. However, when it hits our accounts and things change for us, there's unforeseen consequences that I think need to be considered. For us, that CTE grant cut us by about $14,000. And the reason I say that is we just purchased things to do a CDL program for our students, industry grade welders. We did all of those things by leveraging our ESSER funds and trying to really build some project-based learning, work-based learning in our district. So what happens now when that money is set aside only for supplies, and we got over 20,000 only for supplies, that's not what we need it for right now. We need it for salaries. We need it to be able to get some things for math that we need. We can get donors for the supplies from our industry partners that we have for CTE. They're willing, and we can go out and do that. What we can't say is we need help in math. we need math supplies. People don't want to donate as much for that. Blodorn doesn't want to come out and say, well, we'll go ahead and donate for that. So I just want to make clear that that categorical grant, when things are taken out of that block model, it really has unforeseen consequences that I'd like people to consider. And please reach out to your districts and say, what do you see about this if we do this? And again, I encourage you to keep within that block model. And as you can see, when we talk about being funded for only 0.15 of an instructional facilitator, we figure out how to do things within there to make things work for our students that are in front of us. And like I told you, I'm very proud we are the #1 district in the state per last year's YTOP. However, 80% is not good enough for us. We will strive for 100%, and we will not quit until that happens. And so I want to make very clear that when we have that ability within the block model, it's not because I want to be willy-nilly with our funds. It's because I want to keep being able to give our students exactly what they deserve, which is exactly the same as big schools. So I encourage you to consider that when you're looking at that piece. Also, the insurance, health insurance for us, we're not funded at 100% for every employee. However, it doesn't matter if the employee is a principal or a paraprofessional or a janitor, their insurance costs the same amount. And so that's another thing to consider looking at as well. We are also not fully funded for professional development days. We have to pay our teachers the same amount for a professional development day as we do for a day that they work with students. And so I think there's some missed things within that piece. And the last thing I want to talk about is lunch. Lunch for us, we had to backfill our lunch program by $85,000 from our general fund this last year. And so looking at that and how we can do better, I think is very important. I came back to the state of Wyoming. I'm a Glen Rock graduate. Went and taught in Colorado for a little while. But I came back here because it was time for my twins to go to school, and I knew what Wyoming offers our kids, and I wanted that for my own kids. And as a superintendent in this state, I want to give that to every single kid in this district and in this state. So please help us with that as you're going through and thinking about these budget pieces. And please reach out, because anything we can offer up and help, we want to do. Thank you.
Thank you, appreciate that. Appreciate all three of you. Thank you so much. Again, I think we're going to have a good opportunity tomorrow for public comment. I just wanted to give this time for those who absolutely cannot be here tomorrow. So unless there are any questions, I think I'm going to wrap this up. We will start tomorrow, Mr. Co-Chair, at 8:30 tomorrow, and I will adjourn this meeting. Thank you.